Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 4th day of November, 2024. As the month starts sliding by, I'm meteorologist David Percy. Up first, let's see. Got a windy weekend coming up for a lot of areas, south central Alaska, as well as the Copper River Basin and the North Gulf Coast, and into the northern panhandle. Right now, high wind watches are out for the Palmer area, Sutton to Palmer and Wasilla, looking for northeast winds of 40 to 50 miles an hour with gusts to 55 to 65 miles per hour. Again, that's out late tonight and through the weekend, actually. Also, a high wind watch out for Valdez for northeast winds of 35 to 45 miles per hour. And gusts 60 to 75 miles per hour there. And for Whittier, looking for west-northwest winds, 35 to 45 miles an hour, with maximum gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour. And also looking at Seward, could see gusts there, 60 to 70 miles per hour out of the north. Pretty windy conditions in Seward today. They're seeing gusts up around 50 miles an hour this afternoon. And so those winds expected to increase late tonight and continue right through the weekend, but start coming down probably on Sunday in all of these areas as the gradient relaxes. Higher pressure ridge moves over the area, but very strong winds into the northern panhandle as well. And looking at satellite imagery, can see band of showers moving through the central and southern southeast coast, as well as the northern areas. Another weaker band there coming along the coastline, and that's going to start shifting more off to the east-southeast as that low center tracks southeastward as well. So it's drying out already over the northern panhandle, most of the snow having ended, say up around Haines on the Klondike Highway area. Rain and snow tapering off in the Juneau area. Then over the southwest interior, weak system there. Bringing some areas of light snow with it as it tracks southeastward there. That band of clouds breaking up as it moves through the Kamishak Gap and into the western Alaska Range. But some clouds spilling into Iliamna, reporting snow all day long, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches falling over the Kuskokwim Delta into the southern Kuskokwim Valley, a couple inches falling at Sleep Mute, and pretty good winds there on the southwest and south side of that low center as it moves southeastward. We had wind gusts to close to 70 miles an hour at Cape Newenham today. Bethel had a peak wind gust of 46 miles per hour, as well as Marshall. And King Salmon saw gusts to 40 miles an hour. So pretty windy conditions with that. That system should track off to the southeast this evening, dissipate as it crosses the southern Alaska Range and the Aleutian Range. Could bring a few snow showers into the western Kodiak Island area and maybe southern Cook Inlet, some of which could actually slip on up into Kachemak Bay area and just clip Homer and the Spit there with maybe some snow showers, but it won't last very long or amount to very much. And then you can see a big mass of clouds out to the west there with a warm front clouds spilling into the Pribilof Islands, and the main rain-producing clouds. A lot warmer temperatures coming up with that system. So you can see south to north flow there in the warm front all the way up to about the Russian coast, and then kind of moisture spilling through between two surface highs, one up over the Russian Far East, another one south of the eastern Aleutians, and a little bit of moisture coming through there, pretty light, mostly north of the Pribilofs, kind of linking up with that weakening cold front there over Bristol Bay and up into the Kuskokwim Valley with a low center. And areas of snow and snow showers extending up across Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta today. Again, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches, some areas seeing less than that. And that extends up through the Bering Strait. Otherwise, mostly sunny, south central Alaska, and into the Copper River Basin. Pick up some more clouds, maybe some isolated snow showers over the mountainous terrain. But again, enough gradient now again to kick those winds up out of the north as high as 50 miles an hour in Seward in gusts. And that gradient also tightening over the northern panhandle and the eastern North Gulf Coast as well. Otherwise, areas of light snow slowly tapering off this afternoon, but lingering into this evening for the eastern interior there. And some clouds and maybe flurries or light snow showers for the Arctic coast and North Slope. And then the main moisture now, rain and snow showers over the southern panhandle. 12-hour amounts anywhere from 0.05 of an inch to maybe 1/3 of an inch in some areas there down around Prince of Wales Island, drying out to the north. And for tonight, that area of moisture, rain and snow showers trending toward just snow showers, even down to sea level there over the southern panhandle, and increasing winds, colder temperatures, drier air moving into the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area and eventually into the Juneau area. Tightening gradients, south central Alaska, up into the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. Again, the high wind watch is out tonight through the weekend. Valdez, northeast Prince William Sound, and the Matanuska Valley, Palmer, Wasilla, for gusts anywhere from 60 to 75 miles an hour. Otherwise, breezy over the Copper River Basin as well, with increasing winds along the North Gulf Coast, especially the Copper River Delta. Could see gusts of 70 miles an hour there. Windy, Kodiak Island could see gusts anywhere from 50 to 65 miles an hour out of the northwest there tonight, but lightning winds over Bristol Bay and clearing conditions. High pressure along the west coast keeps it mostly dry there with variable clouds. High pressure over the north slope keeps winds light up that way too with cold temperatures. And for tomorrow, that frontal boundary slips up to St. Lawrence Island. There is probably starting out snow and blowing snow, changing over to rain. Temperatures on the upswing there with that southerly wind flow and rising snowfall levels there. And that band of moisture extends back to the western Aleutians. High pressure makes for light winds. Alaska Peninsula up into the southwest interior, but very tight gradient now. Got storm force winds on the north coast of the Panhandle and probably into the Lynn Canal area as well. At least storm force gusts there. Strong winds south central Alaska, and especially in the Matanuska Valley and the channeled areas of the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. Stays windy, but winds starting to decrease tomorrow evening from west to east slowly. Still some snow shower activity for the extreme southern panhandle, but increasing clearing, colder temperatures for sure with those winds coming into the northern panhandle. And then strong high pressure over the Yukon on Sunday dominates central and eastern Alaska with moisture sliding northeastward there with that remnants of that first front, bringing gale force winds to the Chukchi Sea in the western Arctic coast with snow and blowing snow in areas there up to the central Arctic coastal zone. But a lot of sunshine over the interior and cold temperatures. You can see a much slacker gradient now along the North Gulf Coast, south central Alaska. So winds will be coming down throughout the day, becoming kind of light and variable for Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay. And then southeast winds up to 40, 45 knots for the Alaska Peninsula with higher gusts around Cold Bay with rain heavy at times, warmer temperatures, rain and wind for the Pribilofs, and just cold, clear, and windy for the Panhandle. And looking at lows tonight for the southeast coast, they're anywhere from 20 to 30 degrees and 5 below to 10 above for interior Alaska, southern interior Alaska. Otherwise, teens down to the south, upper 20s over Kodiak Island. Highs tomorrow in the lower to mid 20s for Bristol Bay, and the teens, Kuskokwim Valley, Susitna Valley near 20 for Palmer, Anchorage area, and in the 20s for those Kenai Peninsula areas. Single numbers for the Copper River Basin, and highs mid to upper 20s over the northern panhandle, but near 40 down to the south, followed by lows 10 to 15 below for the Copper River Basin and 5 to 10 below for the Kuskokwim Valley. Single numbers 0 to 10 above for south central Alaska, and then the highs on, let's see, Sunday afternoon. Mid to upper 20s for much of the Panhandle, even Sitka staying below freezing for the throughout the day, and just 34 degrees for Craig, Klawock, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Forecast highs there. Shade above 0 in the Copper River Basin, and 10 to 15 for the Kuskokwim Valley. Upper 20s for Bristol Bay, near 40 Kodiak. And right around 20 south central Alaska, closer to 30 for Homer. Lows tonight, northeast interior, 5 to 15 below, right around 0 for the Arctic coast, warmer toward the Bering Strait. Saturday afternoon highs below 0 in the Brooks Range, and 5 to 15 for the Arctic coast, 5 to 10 for the Tanana Valley, followed by lows 15 to 25 below for the eastern interior, warmer in the 20s out toward the Seward Peninsula, followed by highs mid to upper 30s there for the Seward Peninsula, upper 30s St. Lawrence Island, but below 0 in the Yukon Flats to Arctic Village. Out to the southwest coast, lows 20 to 25 tonight, right around freezing for the Pribilofs, and mid 30s to near 40 for the central and western Aleutians, followed by highs in the 40s for the Aleutians and 30 to 35 for the southwest coast, 25 to 35 for the lows on Sunday morning.
And And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on into flying weather. Some IFR along the central Brooks Range. Otherwise, not too bad. Some VFR for the North Slope and areas at the Arctic coast, and also across the northern interior valleys. And in the central interior, looking at areas of IFR, Kuskokwim Valley, up to the western Alaska Range, and into the Tanana Valley, 40-mile country there, with marginal VFR in some areas of IFR, and then south and east of the Alaska Range, good VFR, all the way down to Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, St. Lawrence Island, kind of in a VFR zone, and also VFR from Adak eastward to Unalaska Island, and the Panhandle, VFR for the afternoon. Saturday, mostly VFR, interior Alaska. We've got some marginal VFR and IFR now sliding into the Yukon Delta, southwest interior, and northward, marginal VFR for the Seward Peninsula, and moving on to the northwest coast to about Point Hope, and some marginal VFR in the central Arctic coast, with limited IFR out west over the Bering Sea, mostly marginal out there into the Alaska Peninsula. And again, good VFR, northern 2 to 3/4 of the Panhandle, actually. Some lingering marginal VFR down to the south. And then for the Sunday morning time frame, lower conditions stay out along the west coast. Some of that trying to push up the Yukon River Valley there, but really mostly VFR central and eastern interior, as well as the North Slope and the Arctic coast. Got some marginal VFR in the eastern Arctic coast, but good VFR, Prince William Sound over toward Yakutat, all the Copper River Basin, right on down across the Panhandle to Dixon Entrance, as well as Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay, some IFR over the western Aleutians, and also over the northern Bering Sea, Yukon Delta, through the Bering Strait to Kivalina, Point Hope, and maybe Cape Lisburne. Then for the afternoon, that area of IFR expands in across the Noatak Valley to long mountain areas and the southern Seward Peninsula, and then a couple of bands of IFR out over the Bering Sea, Pribilofs to the eastern Aleutians, westward to Atka, another one back to the west, but good VFR, central eastern interior, VFR from the Arctic coast southward into the Gulf of Alaska, Kodiak Island, Panhandle looking really good for Sunday afternoon. Passes Anatuvik and Atigan, both VFR for the day Saturday. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR as well, either approach and rainy, looking good. Good VFR for windy as well. Isabel, marginal VFR becomes VFR as the day wears on, and Mentesta will be probably marginal VFR throughout the day, maybe seeing a little improvement in the afternoon. But Tanita, good VFR. Portage, looking good with VFR flying, as well as Chilkoot and White, both passes VFR. Freezing levels south of Kodiak Island and right across the Alaska Peninsula there at the surface there in between the Pribilof St. Matthew Island, and cutting across the Gulf of Alaska down into Dixon Entrance. Now that colder air pushing in across the Panhandle, and then a big push of warm air out west. You can see 2,000 feet almost up to the Russian coast, with 8 to 10,000 feet over the southwest Bering Sea and the west central Aleutians. And icing. Look for some areas of isolated moderate rime icing coming into the southwest coast, northern Bering Sea area, St. Matthew Island. Then another narrow band with the frontal boundary there extending back toward the central Aleutians, really not all that significant. And then some possible mixed icing of the light varieties, maybe isolated moderate over the southern Panhandle. Jet stream, ridge over the eastern Bering Sea, and the jet coming over the top of that northwest, 105 to 145 knots right down across Iliamna Lake, Kodiak Island area. And at 9,000 feet, southwest flow out over the western Bering Sea, pushing moisture, warmer air up to the northeast there, up to 75 knots, and then coming over the top of the ridge, kind of cutting through the two centers there. We've got 50 to 55 knot northerlies across the western Alaska Range, the Alaska Peninsula area. Light for the Panhandle and up over the northern interior under high pressure. And at 3,000 feet, pretty strong winds, 40 to 45 knots out of the north from the western Alaska Range down across northeast Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, up to 60 knots there for the North Gulf Coast, especially Prince William Sound, 65 knots around Yakutat out of the northeast, and also increasing winds on the Panhandle. Look for considerable moderate chop for the northern Panhandle North Gulf Coast, South Central Alaska, Kodiak Island, Western Central Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Dave Snyder, and joining me again is Cindy Preller. She's the Tsunami Program Manager for Alaska Region's National Weather Service. Thanks again for joining us, Cindy.
Thanks for having me back, Dave.
Sure thing. And I love saying Tsunami Program Manager for Alaska's National Weather Service because that's not weather. Why is the Tsunami Program part of the National Weather Service? Well,
it's because the Weather Service absolutely rocks at warning people for every kind of, devastating natural hazard.
Mm-hmm. The mission of the Weather Service is to protect life and property. And so how does the Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska, which is a very unique office, again, within the Weather Service, it's not weather, how do those folks help us protect life and property?
The National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer is a national warning center, and we analyze seismic traces 24/7 all around the world. So when there's an earthquake anywhere on the planet, we see it and analyze it within minutes.
Within minutes, and there's actually a goal to have it under, was it 5 minutes?
If there is a tsunami warning to be issued for continental America, we must get that out, or shoot to get that out in 5 minutes.
Okay. Now that's not something I have ever learned to do, so I know it would be a struggle for me to do that under probably hours, but it is fascinating to watch, and the office is open on a regular basis for tours, right?
Absolutely. Come by Friday.
Okay.
Yep, every Friday at 1, 2, and 3 p.m. and they're open public free tours. And it's the most interesting place on the planet. You really should check it out.
Okay, and the office team is made up of people that are earth scientists, not meteorologists or atmospheric scientists. Talk about some of the types of people that work there.
Right, we are out of place in our National Weather Service, but we are geologists, geophysicists, oceanographers. We even have an astrophysicist on board. Computer software architects, electronic technicians that are brilliant and innovative. Our software is all written in-house. Our instrumentation is designed in-house. So it's a really, really unique place. And it's just a couple handfuls of people that work there. So
sure.
Yeah.
One of my favorite ways to get a tsunami alert message is on Twitter.
Right.
And I can follow the Twitter address, and we'll put that up on the screen for you there. But it's usually a very quick message that tells you initially what the magnitude of an earthquake could be and about where its epicenter was. What are some of the other ways that you can get that alert message?
Well, Twitter's my favorite too.
Yeah.
And you don't even need a Twitter account to receive it. So it just comes in like an SMS message. But you can also receive it via email, weather radio, of course, the crawler on your television screen, on the internet, Google Alerts, marine radio if you're out in harbors and boats. Actually, marine radio is probably,
it is a good one.
That's our partnership with the Coast Guard. We're really grateful for that, absolutely. But there's a variety of ways in dissemination.
Okay.
And locally, but locally in the communities, the sirens will go off as well.
Right. So lots of different ways to get that very important message very quickly when that matters to you. One of the ways that the Warning Center practices with communities is a test on a yearly basis, right?
Right.
How does that work?
Thanks for bringing that up. It's a controversial issue, but it's super important to help us warn better and really serve Alaskans. So the week of March 27th, the commemoration of the 1964 event, for that week we have a Tsunami Preparedness Week every year. We like communities to get out and do drills and practice and do everything we can to raise awareness. And part of that is a live code test where we actually issue the warning message live and we activate the emergency alert system, which means sirens go off, the TV crawler happens, and it's a test.
We're doing everything that would normally happen without the real threat of the tsunami, just to practice as much as possible.
Right, and this is a major partnership with the State of Alaska, Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the Emergency Operations Center, and the Alaska Broadcasters Association. Without the media, we wouldn't be able to do this. So the three groups really work tightly together to do our best to warn, educate the public that this is happening so they don't wonder and get scared about it. It has been remarkable what we've learned. I mean, it pretty much breaks somewhere every time, but then we fix it. and it gets better. So a quick example is just a few years ago, we used to, when we issued a message, it would activate the entire state.
Right.
Right? I mean, Kotzebue, Nome, Bethel, everybody would be in tsunami warning. And so now we can regionalize it to where the actual event is taking place.
Right.
That's pretty huge.
Right, right. So identifying points of failure and also points of success and making sure we continue down that successful path so that folks are warned as quickly and accurately as possible.
Absolutely. And, you know, to get our communities involved to prep themselves, prep their businesses, prep their tourism, prep their schools, you know, just make this an annual thing they need to be doing.
Right. So as citizens wanting to be prepared, we should be prepared to learn more about that test that's happening usually toward the end of March every year.
Right. And you should be happy that it's happening.
Right.
Instead of upset. Definitely be happy that it's happening.
Right. Just as we test tornado sirens in tornado country, we also have to test the tsunami program as well.
Right. Because there isn't enough time. You know, for a local tsunami, the wave will arrive in less than 2 minutes. So it's super important that people know what to do.
Very good. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for helping us know more about the Tsunami Ready program and the test. And the Tsunami Warning Center is a very unique and very important job in the National Weather Service that is just fascinating to me every time I visit the office. So,
it's the only one for the continent. You really should come check it out.
it's an international effort.
Yes.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Dave.
And thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Dave Snyder. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to the marine forecast, strong winds for the northern panhandle. Pretty windy across the entire area for the day Saturday. You can see storm force winds on the north coast. Northeast 50 knots and the south coast gale warnings. Northeast to northwest 35 to 40 knots. Seas as high as 23 feet. And for Clarence Strait, small craft advisory, southeast winds 25 knots, northeast 30 for Stevens Passage. And the strongest winds in Lynn Canal sustained out of the north at 55 knots. Probably be some higher gusts with 10-foot seas. And then for the day on Sunday, second day of the weekend, stays windy most areas. For Lynn Canal, coming down to just full gales out of the north at 40 knots. Northeast 30 knots for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, northwest at 25 knots. Gale warnings on the south coast. Northeast winds 40 to 45 knots. Storm warnings continue for the north coast as those winds stay out of the northeast, sustained at 50 knots. Prince William Sound, gale warnings tomorrow. North winds 35 knots. Sea 7 feet. Eastern North Gulf Coast, gale warnings. North 35 knots. Gusts to 60 knots out of the Copper River Delta. And the Western North Gulf Coast, north winds 40 knots. Northwest 40 for the Barren Islands. Storm warnings for Kamishak Bay. Northwest winds 50 knots. Small craft advisories for Cook Inlet. North winds 30 knots. Seas 8 feet. And then for Sunday, Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, northeast 25 for Kamishak Bay, east winds 30 knots for the Barren Islands, and for the North Gulf Coast, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. Prince William Sound, winds will be north at 20 knots, seas down to 4 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, northwest winds 40 knots. Alaska Peninsula, north to northwest winds 20 to 30 knots. And for Bristol Bay, small craft advisories for winds out of the northwest at 25 knots. And then on Sunday, southeast winds 45 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay, also southeast winds at 45 knots. Kodiak Island, east winds 30 to 35 knots. And for the Unalaska Island, variable winds 15 knots tomorrow. And for Unmak Island, south to southeast winds at 20 knots. And Adak and Atka, south to southeast 25 knot winds. Western Aleutians, gale warnings, south winds 35 to 40 knots. On Sunday, storm warnings for the Eastern Aleutians, south to southeast winds 50 knots with seas 17 to 31 feet. Gale warnings for the Central Aleutians, west winds 40 to 45 knots. And kind of a variable wind pattern for the Western Aleutians there, from Kiska to Shimia, northeast at 20, for Amchitka Island, northwest 25. And for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast tomorrow, north winds only 15 knots, but the Yukon Delta Coast, south at 25, gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, south winds 35 knots, south winds 30 knots for St. Matthew Island and the Pribilofs, south winds at 20 knots, seas 7 feet. For Sunday, gale warning, St. Paul, St. George, St. Matthew Island, and the Yukon Delta Coast, all southeast at 40 knots. Kuskokwim Delta Coast, gale warning, southeast 45-knot winds. St. Lawrence Island, south winds at 30 knots. Up along the eastern Boulevard Sea coast from Kaktover to Demarcation Point, brisk wind advisories for west winds at 25 knots. Otherwise, farther to the west winds at 15 knots, central Arctic coast, light winds out of the north, and then southeast 20-knot winds for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea, east to south winds at 20 knots. Big increase in those winds on Sunday for the Chukchi Sea, south winds 40 to 45 knots, western Arctic coast, south winds increasing to 45 knots as well, and the central coast, south winds 30 knots, brisk wind advisories for southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, not too light for brisk wind advisories for the eastern Boulevard Sea coast. And for tonight, winds will stay light up there along the Arctic coast, as well as the North Slope and all interior Alaska and the western Bering Sea, but increasing winds, high wind watches out for the Madanuska Valley and northeast Prince William Sound for winds increasing late tonight through tomorrow up to 60 to 75 miles an hour in gusts. Same thing for Seward. You could see wind gusts of 70 miles an hour out of the north there. Rain and snow showers diminishing and moving southward as cold air and strong winds move into the northern panhandle for tomorrow. And windy, cold, and dry over interior Alaska. Warmer temperatures pushing into the northern Bering Sea and northwest Bering. And a strong storm brings gale force winds and rain to the Alaska Peninsula. Clear and cold eastern interior. Very windy over the northern panhandle. Blowing snow on the western Arctic coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.